Record.
Brilliant. Okay, we got it now. Okay. Hi, everyone. Let me see who's around. There's Noemi, there's Leslie, there's Formazione Tages, and Renato. We don't have your name on that screen there.
Yeah,
okay.
I can change that, no problem.
No problems. We've got Emmeline there, and we got Marina. Hi, everyone.
Hi. Hello.
Hello.
We're recording the session, and so we'll put this on somewhere. So whoever doesn't turn, whoever can't make it, they get a chance to see this at a later time. Okay, so just to present ourselves a little quickly. My name's Gary, and this is the BEwell Hub community get together. BEwell standing for Business and Entrepreneur Wellness, because being an entrepreneur myself, I've understood that it's not just about business, it's also about looking after yourself to run the business well. And so in 20 years of running my business, I've come across many situations where people have asked me, how's the business going? But people don't ask me, how are you going? So I try and actually get these moments together, bringing in experts on certain fields of business, but also entrepreneurial well-being, bringing them together, get them to talk about it. Today we've got our expert Stuart Foster, and he's going to be talking about burnout, very important. It seems like, everyone knows something about it, but no one knows anything about it. And I'm sure Stuart is going to be telling us really what it's all about. Okay, we're going to do that for like 25, half an hour, 25, 30 minutes, very informal chat. You can ask questions if you want. Just put your hand up or raise a thumb or whatever. We can ask questions to Stuart. After that, we're going to go into breakout rooms, and everyone gets a chance to work together with a partner and go a little bit deeper into understanding whether we are burnt out or we're on the limit or whatever. So that's going to give everyone a chance to be sort of active as well. Okay, so hello to everyone coming in. Nice seeing you all, and let's make this an enjoyable, active session. Yeah, we want to know all about burnout and what it is. And so let me give the mic over to Stuart. Stuart, thank you very much for being here. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about what is burnout.
Cool, thank you, Gary. I can see you nodded there, so you can obviously hear me, which is good. So I'm going to assume that everybody else, thank you. I'm going to assume that everybody else can hear me as well. Thank you, Renato. So before we get into the topic of burnout, just a little bit about myself. So hopefully at the bottom of the screen, you can see Stuart at Unscrambled Head. So my name is Stuart Foster. I hang out mainly on LinkedIn. So if you want to find me, you can find me as Stuart Foster, or you can find me as Unscrambled Heads on LinkedIn. And I also hang out on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, but from a business perspective, LinkedIn is the primary place where I kind of hang out. I experienced burnout. In 2015. I probably took somewhere in the region of 2 months off work as a result of burnout way back in 2015. At that stage, that was after a 25, 30-year career in the corporate world. But it opened my eyes to the helping professions. And so I made the conscious decision to transition my career from a corporate world into the world of a helping profession. And I've been running my business now on Unscrambled Heads for a couple of years. What I do is I provide one-to-one services. So I work mainly one-to-one with people, individuals, but I also work going into corporate environments, providing workshops like this around burnout prevention and burnout recovery services, that type of thing. Okay, so advertisement done. Let's get on to the topic why we're really here today, which is about burnout. So I want to tell you a story. I want to tell you a story about a person. The story really is about that person, and the person had a very successful corporate career. They were seen by their peers in their corporate environment as being at a very senior level. Had they worked in different organizations, maybe in a financial organization, they would have been known as a vice president, but this person didn't work in finance. They worked in a completely different environment. It was a high performing environment. So when I talk about high performing, that person worked incredibly long hours. They worked in an environment where there was peer-to-peer competition for salary increases, competition for promotions, but they had to collaborate. But there was this kind of internal stress and dialogue about peer-to-peer competition. The environment was about being right rather than being collaborative. The environment was about being seen versus having a balanced lifestyle. And the environment was about being quite logical and having kind of repressed emotions in a business environment. So that was the environment that this person was working in when they had their burnout experience. 20 years before that, they experienced a major trauma event, which on the surface looked to have been resolved, but actually it was completely unresolved. So that person was carrying a burden for 20 years of major trauma with emotions stored inside their body. And then think about the environment that they were working in: long hours, peer-to-peer competition, being right, being seen, being very logical. 6 months before they experienced their acute burnout, their manager left. So their route back into the organization, the route where their emotions could have been vented, was taken away. They had nowhere to get rid of their frustrations to do with work. 10 years before that, 10 years before the acute burnout experience for this person, the corporation changed. The corporation changed from being a very caring organization to being one which was very shareholder driven. And that meant that many of the decisions that the company were taking were financial decisions at the loss of taking care of the employees. And 1 year before they experienced their acute burnout, they changed industry. They changed industry into an industry where their clients had 5 years experience, 15 years experience, in some cases 40 years experience, and they felt like a complete imposter. And so on the day of their acute burnout, they knew something was not right. They were sick in the gut. They had this awful feeling inside their belly. They couldn't think straight. They could not think. They couldn't cognitively think for more than 5 or 10 minutes at a time. They felt disillusioned about their organization. They felt exhausted. This person felt physically exhausted. Many people think about burnout as being physical exhaustion, which absolutely it is. But they were cognitively exhausted. They were emotionally exhausted. And they were spiritually exhausted as well. And when they finished the client meeting, they went into the client meeting, came out of that client meeting. And if you haven't guessed it already, this is me. I went into the client meeting, came out of the client meeting. It was tricky, but the type of thing that I'd done many, many times before. Walked 400 yards down the road into a shopping mall. I got down on my haunches, put my head in my hands, and for a period of time, and I can never tell people how long it was, but think of it as being 30 seconds. Maybe it was a minute, maybe it was 5 minutes. It wasn't an hour, but it was a short enough but long enough period of time. My brain was clicking and I couldn't interrupt it. And it would do that for 5 seconds. It was just going, blah, 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 and I couldn't interrupt it. And then for the next 5 seconds, it would go into what I call kind of, it was a very kind of loose brain activity going on, very, very loose, couldn't really think of anything. And then it would flip again, and then my brain would go, and that would go on for 5 seconds. And then another 5 seconds later, it was just this jelly brain again, where no thought was going in, and I just couldn't control that for a period of a few minutes. So that was the most acute vision of my burnout experience, of just coming out of a client meeting, go down on my haunches and not being able to control what was going on in my mind for that short period of time. And to be frank with you, it was quite scary. And I immediately stopped working, and fortunately, and I was signed off work for approximately 2 months before I went back to work. So that was my story. But my story, I tell my story quite often. I tell my story in these workshops all the time, because actually my story is not unique to me. It's very unique to me, but actually there are so many common indicators and common factors about that story that go across every single industry, every single cohort of people. That means that most people working in a business corporate context are susceptible to this thing called burnout. There are many surveys done by companies like Indeed, who are a recruitment organization, by McKinsey, by organizations in the UK, Mind, look after mental well-being. I see you there, Gary. I've just finished my train of thought here. And some of the data that comes back from that say things like 50% of the workforce are burnt out. 1 in 4 employees rate their workload as being totally unmanageable. And if we look in the world of industry, there are some well-known people who have gone public about experiencing burnout. People like the prior CEO of one of the top 4 banks in the UK, a person called Antonio Horta Osorio. So the CEO of Lloyds Bank. This was about 10 years ago now. More recently, we can think about the experiences of Jacinda Ardern, the New Zealand Prime Minister, Tom Blomfeld, who started up a challenger bank called Monzo. It's the bank that my daughter uses. It's a totally digital bank, had to take time out from being the CEO. And Ariana Huffington, who started the Huffington Post and is now the CEO of an organization called Thrive, who focus in on well-being in the workplace. And as we have gone through, as burnout has become, let's call it, more popular, more people are sharing their experiences of burnout. Gary, you put your hand up.
Yeah, my question, Stuart, is, you were, let's say, fortunate or not fortunate, I don't know, to have the chance to take 2 months to recover from this burnout. What happens when, like myself, I think my situation was very, not similar, but I had to just keep going because I'm the owner of the company. And so my burnout showed up in, like, I would come to work and I would have these vomiting fits. I'd have to go to the bathroom. I'd have to get back in the car and go back home and spend all day in the dark, completely in the dark, under the covers, with splitting headaches and nausea. And so but I had to continue. I couldn't take 2 months off because everything was on me as the owner of the company. So question to you is, what happens when you're in a situation where you're not able to take a couple of months off because you haven't got a team to run the business for you, or because, I don't know, the company won't give you the time off? What do you do in that case?
So I will answer that. I will answer your question, but let me ask you the question back, Gary. So how do you feel that you managed to come through that? Because let me just finish there.
How did I come through that?
Yeah, how do you feel that you came through it?
I don't know how I did that, really. I seriously don't know. I mean, I went through years like that. At least once a month or once every 6 weeks, my family would see me. I would go back home and I'd get dressed, meaning to take the kids to school, and then I'd come to work. I'd get in the office and I'd be sweating and I'd spitting headache and all this, and I might even go to the toilet and vomit and come back in again to the office, or I would have to go back home. And so how did I get through that? I don't really. It was just part. I don't know. I blamed it on something else. It wasn't stress. I blamed it on maybe the lifestyle, the food, or
interesting.
It wasn't work. It wasn't work that was causing that. In that moment, for me, it was something else.
Yeah. So obviously, it's a very difficult question to answer because it would be very specific to each individual person. But in that type of environment, I would actually sit down with that person one-to-one and do a complete kind of life balance view of what's going on with them. And particularly in the first instance, what would be really important would be me as a coach providing that person, so you in this particular example, with a channel to vent, as in to offload whatever it was that you needed to offload. So that would be the first thing, because burnout is about physical exhaustion and it is also about emotional exhaustion. There's the cognitive and there's the spiritual exhaustion as well. But many, many times, a lot of people see this physical and emotional. So first of all, giving that person a channel to vent, to release whatever it is that is frustrating them, or giving them anger towards whatever is within their environment. In burnout, it's typically around the organization, the boss, a peer level person. For a sole trader, for an owner of business, it could be actually anger towards that business because you know that it is making you unwell. And so there can be some frustration associated with that. So firstly, it's to give that person a channel to understand what's going on and to express. The second thing, and one of the first things that I do with clients, is to what I call fuel their tank, or fuel your tank, which is doing all of the self-care things that typically, we might get time to look at the stages of burnout, but typically in the stages of burnout, things that get put to the side because people are working longer and longer hours, being more and more focused on work, is the self-care. So it's about venting, a channel to understand what's going on, to release emotion, and it's about taking care of ourselves, because typically on the stages of burnout, people put those things to one side, going for a walk, doing their meditation, taking regular breaks from work, drinking plenty of water. Amazing. So one of the first things that happens is I will work with clients and actually have them go see a doctor to make sure that there's nothing physically wrong, but then also to get them to do the self-care aspects that are so important. But great question, because one of the questions I commonly get asked is, so burnout is about the workplace. And when people think about a workplace, they think about, the shiny corporate office with hundreds of employees, or they think about small 20-person companies with the employee being frustrated with the boss. But actually, it's about entrepreneurs working on their own. It's about sole traders working on their own as well. So when I think about burnout and the work context is very broad. So let me just
another question.
Yep.
Anyway, anyone can jump in. Okay, I'm just taking some questions. I'm just going to put some questions, but feel free to jump in and ask any questions that you want. So when we talk about burnout, we talk about also like the PTSD, the post-trauma stress disorder. No. Can you? Is that something different?
So hold that thought, Gary. Because what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to share my screen to first of all define what burnout is, and then I'll come back and say, okay, so how does that compare to something like a PTSD or a depression or something like that. So share screen, PowerPoint, and if I do this, hopefully you can see maybe a blank screen at the moment. Yes, good, thank you. Yeah. So what is burnout syndrome? So the first thing to say is burnout is officially defined as a syndrome, not a disease. And there's a very interesting, I had to actually look it up. What does that really mean? So a disease, in a very high level view, and I'm not a medic, not a medical professional, a disease is something with a known cause, as opposed to a syndrome, which is more loosely defined. So there is no checklist that you can go to and that would say, I feel sick in my stomach, I've got migraines in my head, and I've got real shoulder pain, and they'll go, yep, you've got burnout. So there is none of that. Yes, syndrome, burnout is a much looser defined thing, but it is defined, and it is defined by the World Health Organization as an official syndrome. So the first thing about burnout is it happens in the workplace context. So there always has to be a workplace in which burnout is happening, because this is the environment in which burnout happens in. And this is so, so important. And we'll come on to that in a little while. So it happens in the workplace. At its very core, burnout is unmanaged chronic stress. So all of those stressors that you described, Gary, all of the stressors that I described in my experience, they're not unique to us. They're different stressors for many people, but at its core, burnout is about unmanaged chronic stress. Imagine going into work every single day with that person that you've got to work with. It's just going ding, 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 and that will just get right on you. Yeah, and if that happens for long periods of time and you're not getting promoted and you're cheesed off that this environment doesn't change, that stress builds and builds and builds. Particularly if you've got other stresses that are happening outside in the non-workplace environment, and you've got to go to work, you hate it, and this person's just going on in your ear all day long. Yeah, so unmanaged chronic stress. It's also about this thing called exhaustion. So it will appear in us as exhaustion. And many people think of this thing about physical exhaustion, as I said at the start, but it's also, I perceive it to be 4 dimensions of exhaustion. Physical exhaustion, you have absolutely no energy whatsoever. So you're physically exhausted, you are emotionally exhausted. Imagine going home from your workplace and your partner, I was married, or still am married, but you go home and you are taking your emotions that are repressed at work and you're taking them home, and you're at your wife, in my case, at the dog, at the children, right? You are emotionally exhausted. Just by the by, Gary, I'm admitting people into the room as that keeps popping up on my screen here, but I keep admitting them. You are cognitively exhausted as well. So this feeling of lack of concentration, brain fog, unable to connect two things together that maybe you would normally have been able to do it in a workplace logically. And you are spiritually exhausted again. This thing of, oh, why do I bother? I can't see a way out. So you are spiritually exhausted as well. So spiritual being a very broad definition there. You have, in the official definition of burnout by the World Health Organization, you have distant or negative feelings towards your work context, whatever that means. In my case, it was about my second line manager who hadn't replaced my first line manager. It was about my organization, who were really, really caring 10 years before, and they had changed into this financially driven organization that were just so interested in the bottom line and shareholder value that they'd completely forgotten about the employee. Rightly or wrongly, there's no judgment there for me now towards the organization, but the thing changed. So there was this negative feeling towards the organization. And as a result, we experience degraded performance or results. In the official definition, it's called reduced efficacy. And that is what burnout is. Yeah, it's a kind of a loosely defined thing that happens in the workplace when you are exhausted, where you are typically angry towards the organization. And as a result, your performance dips. Okay, so let me stop sharing there, because that was the one slide that I just wanted to share with you. So it's officially defined in the World Health Organization, specifically in the International Classification of Diseases, by this thing called burnout. And if you want to, you can just look it up. And the official definition is a lot more wordy than that, but what I've just shown you there is a Stuart's pictorial view of what burnout is. So, but it is different.
Stuart, going back to my question, the PTSD, how would you...
Yep, so different from PTSD, because PTSD does not necessarily have to have a workplace context associated with it. So you could be driving down the road, have a major car accident, and that could be a PTSD kind of event. So there is definitely no workplace context associated with it. However, the two things are very aligned. So the event that I particularly had 33 years ago now, was later diagnosed. So it is so PTSD being formally recognizable, diagnosable thing, as opposed to a syndrome. I was diagnosed as having PTSD. And that was the underlying emotional thing that was in my body already. That then the way I see it is the PTSD had taken me up to here. Think about the pressure cooker. PTSD had taken me up to here, and every single day going into work and being cheesed off with work, going dum, 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 just adding and adding and adding, and until eventually I was unable to perform. So very, very related to it. Many times, I was going to say typically there, many times people have some form of event in their prior history that provides a backlog of things that have not been released, that then help to cause burnout. So very, very related.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. Rashmi's got a question. Rashmi's got you got your hand up. You want to ask the question?
Yes, yeah, I have a question. Like, Stuart is talking about the work environment. So, is it any environment where we need to work, like for a household lady who has to be not working, not a professional, but has a lot of responsibilities of looking out and managing all the household things, the financial things, sides, managing bank accounts, sending emails, connecting with related, all kind of family related things. So is it possible for that lady to become burnout after some time, because it's a lot of things that she's taking on?
Great question again, Rashmi. Thank you. If you look at the official definition of burnout, I will assert to you that what you described would not be described as burnout. However, if you take Stuart's personal view, and I'm going to give you my own personal view, my personal view is that that is exactly the same as burnout. Your workplace context in that environment is your home. Yeah, you're not going to a workplace to earn money. You are working in the home. And so this is, to me, this is your workplace environment. And people can get just as stressed, just as angry towards their workplace environment, in this context, the home, as they can about going to work and experiencing something over here in the workplace. I would ascribe to the view, Rashmi, that for that scenario to be the case, that person should be the main home manager. Yeah, so that is their full-time job, so to speak. And I've been fortunate that right now I'm taking increasing care of my 93-year-old mother. And so another environment where I believe that burnout exists maybe wouldn't be described as being officially burnout, but somebody who is a 100% caregiver, free of charge, no money involved, for a family member, I would assert to you that that is an environment where burnout could also exist. Fortunately, I'm not at that position yet, but I can see how that could be the case. Gary, another question.
Yeah, Gary Kennedy's got his hand up. Gary?
Yeah.
Oh, Gary, yes.
Hi there. There's a really nice presentation, Stuart, and I think it's well needed. A couple of things I want to say just to reiterate. I think your advice as a coach to a person coming to you is absolutely go and check your physical symptoms with a doctor, because it could be masking something, and it could be something by itself.
Absolutely.
And we're not qualified to say.
Absolutely.
The idea of that's one thing. Syndrome is a collection of symptoms and signs, and you can have any number of those,
correct,
or just a few of them. And so so with a disease, it's particular things you've got. That's what it is. But with a syndrome, you can have any number of these. It's like a pick and mix. So you pick those things. Yeah, that's kind of syndrome. Added to that, my question is, I wonder how useful it is to be labeling this anyway. So, and the reason why I say this is not to denigrate it at all, but all the things that you're describing are things that people all the time have. to a greater or lesser extent. They're all stress-related symptoms, aren't they, and signs?
Yeah.
The exhaustion, physical cognitive, cynicism. Well, some of us have that all the time. We just carry it with us everywhere we go. So I don't know whether even as a coach, whether it's a useful thing, we deal with what's presented to us. So I'm not dealing with a syndrome. I'm dealing with this, with the things that you bring to me, and we can break that down and deal with them separately.
Yeah. So thank you, Gary. So thank you for the affirmation about going to a coach in the first place as being a #1 protocol, and also for your second comment, which I 100% ascribe to. So when I am working one-to-one with a client, we will look at the label called burnout. And actually, when I'm working one-to-one with a client, I will always describe burnout as being the burnout experience, because typically there is a start point, and if you move through it, assuming you move through it, and most people move through it, there is an end point. And so it's a very transient thing. So notice that I'm speaking to you here today. I'm not burnt out. I had burnout 7 years ago now. So I had an experience. People label it as burnout, but just as you said, it was a bag of stuff where I go into the sweetie shop and I'm just picking sweeties off the shelf, and this was my burnout experience. My question to everybody in the audience here today is, where do you hold stress? Where do you hold stress in your body? And if we were to then take a straw poll, if we had a polling mechanism, maybe that's a good thing to do in the future. Maybe many people would say in their shoulders. Some people would say in their neck. Some people would say it's in their stomach. That's where I hold my stress. My stress is held within inside my digestive system. Some people will have it in their back, right? So when we talk about this bag of stuff, the bag of stuff includes things like headaches and migraines. It includes things like digestive issues. It includes things like feeling physically exhausted. It manifests in sleep issues, either going to sleep or having difficulty going to sleep, or waking up repetitively throughout the night. And so I like to say sex. Yes, what about sex? Low mood, chronic pain anywhere in the body. I've had a number of clients recently who've had palpitations. And just as you say, Gary, that's the time when you have to go to your medical professional to get yourself checked out, but it manifests as palpitations. This fried thought, brain fog, scrambled thoughts, lack of concentration, and then the emotional side. Lots of people, I always describe it as being angry, frustrated towards the organization. But it could also be going off to a quiet corner and crying. And so all of these things are this bag of stuff that when you take it to its ultimate, you have to take time off work, in my view. My view, the only way to recover from burnout is to take time away, if you can. Sole trader, entrepreneurs, very difficult, very difficult. But if you can, notice, if you can, time away is the best healer. Time away, and at the same time, that gives you the physical and emotional recovery time. But at the same time, the one question I always ask clients who come to me about when they're experiencing burnout is, what is your relationship to work? And we start to unpack that relationship to work. Does it have to be the be all and end all of everything you do?
Last question, Stuart, last question before we move into the breakout rooms, because I think that the whole idea, I'd like everyone to actually get a little bit more involved individually. There's a question here from Yvette, says, can burnout apply to students as well? You want to answer that question before we? So
I think this would be a very similar reply to what I gave to Rashmi, which is, I think if you were to take the formal definition of burnout, I think the answer to the question would be no. I have a much looser perspective on burnout, because for a student, their workplace environment is the school or is the university, the college, wherever it is that they are going. And if there is, particularly if there is extreme stress, I work with a local selective school, and there is extreme stress on those students to achieve. My own personal opinion is that a student could burn out because of their work environment, which is their school, their college, their university. Another very frequent question I get asked, the frequent questions about work environment are home carer, caring assistant, students, and also sports people as well. So many sports people also experience a stress-related thing, particularly elite sports people, and they have to take time away. And there are many, many examples of that type of environment as well. And I'll close there, Gary.
I think the word stress now is like the word of the day. I've got a young son who comes home and he says he's stressed.
Oh, I'm stressed out.
Everyone is stressed. So I think, to understand what is stress and actually burnout is a complete breakdown, whereas stress is maybe just, it could also be good stress. It's like, talk about the tension, basically.
Yeah.
Actually motivates you to do more or to do better. So, okay. So I think we can go into breakout rooms. I think I'd like to put everyone into breakout rooms. I've prepared a questionnaire. I think that would be fun to see if you guys are burnt out or not. So you can ask each other questions. You get a score at the end. You come back, and then we share what burnout is all about. Okay, so
I've given you host, Gary. So you should be able to do it.
Okay, so what's the time now? It's 25 to the hour, I think, more or less. So we'll have like, I don't know, 15 minutes, 10, 15 minutes, let's say, and then we'll come back and we'll just share what we're taking away from this this session. Okay, so I'll put you into breakout rooms. How many are there? There are 14, 7 rooms. No, first I better share, hadn't I? I better share the, wait a minute.
Sorry, Gary, I actually have to run. I just had a half hour this morning. Thanks a million, Stuart. I just popped a note in the chat box there, but just for your rooms, okay? Nice to see everyone and see you all again soon.
Okay, Noana, thanks. Thank you. Let me just get that questionnaire. It's up here. All right, I got it. It's there. One second, please. Just open this, and then I get my share screen. Oh, why is that? Why am I having problems with my share screen? What can I do with this? Can I put this in the chat? I suppose I can copy it. 1 minute. Let's do it this way. Copy. And in the chat, I'll put it here. Can everyone tell me that they've got it when it arrives?
Yeah, yes, I can see it, Gary.
It's brilliant. Okay, so I'll put you guys into breakout rooms, and then have a look at the questionnaire, go through those questions, 15 minutes, and then we'll come back. Okay.